Office of Public Liaison. The OPL is critically important in building coalitions and support for the President's agenda across every aligned social, faith-based, minority, and economic interest group. It is a critical tool for shaping public opinion and keeping myriad supporters, as well as frenemies and opponents alike, who are within reach, better informed. The OPL is a notably large office. It should have one director who reports to the Chief of Staff's office, either directly or through a deputy according to the chief's preference and focus. The director must maintain relationships not only with other WHO heads, but also with the senior staff of every cabinet department and agency. Since the President's agenda is always in motion, it is important for the OPL to facilitate listening sessions to receive the views of the various leaders and members of key interest groups. The OPL should also have a sufficient number of deputies and special assistants to cover the vast number of disparate interest groups that are engaged daily. The OPL has by far held more meetings in the Eisenhower Executive Office building and within the West Wing itself than any other office within the WHO. The OPL is the chief White House enforcer and gatekeeper among these various interest groups. It has operated best whenever the Chief of Staff has given it permission to use both the proverbial carrot and the proverbial stick to make this work. Communication with the Chief's office is vital. Additionally, the OPL has had an outsized role in presidential scheduling and both official and political travel. The OPL director should come from the President's election campaign or Capitol Hill, but should not have deeply entrenched connections to a K Street entity or any other potential stakeholder. Some prior relationships can create real or perceived biases towards one group or another. The director should be amiable, gregarious, highly organized, and willing to shoulder criticism and pushback from interest groups and other elements of the administration. Unlike the director, OPL deputies and special assistants need a deep understanding of the Capitol, from K Street to Capitol Hill. They should have extensive experience in private industry, the labor sector, the conservative movement, and among the specific interest groups with which they will be asked to engage on behalf of the White House. OPL staffers work with more external and internal parties than any other WHO staffers. In turn, they must be effective communicators and initiative takers. They must also be able to influence, persuade, and most important, listen to various stakeholders and ensure that they feel heard. All OPL staffers must understand from the outset that their jobs might be modified or even phased out entirely as the administration's priorities change. Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. The IGA connects the White House to state, county, local, and tribal governments. In other words, it is the one-stop shop for disseminating an administration's agenda to all non-federal government entities. The IGA should have a director to whom one or two deputy directors report. The director must ensure that the White House remains connected to all non-federal government entities. The interests and perspectives of these entities are represented in policy discussions, organized events with the West Wing, EOP, senior staff, and IGA staff throughout the departments and agencies. The IGA can be staffed in a variety of ways, but two arrangements are most common. Each deputy and that deputy's staffers are responsible for a type of government. A group of staffers is responsible for a specific geographical region of the country. The IGA, as suggested above, represents the interests and perspectives of non-federal government entities, but its primary job is to make sure that these entities understand an administration's agenda and ultimately support it. The IGA must work with all other White House offices, especially the OPA and the OPI, and manage its staff throughout the departments and agencies. IGA staffers must therefore have communication skills, understand political nuance, and be willing to engage in complex policy discussions. They should also be not just generally responsive, but also proactive in seeking out the interests and perspectives of non-federal government entities. White House Policy Councils. As the federal government has ballooned in size over the past century, it has become increasingly difficult for the president alone to direct his agenda across the executive branch. 3 White House policy councils have come into existence to help the president control the bureaucracy and ensure continued alignment between agency leadership and White House priorities. The councils are, as previewed above, are the NSC, NEC, and DPC. Each is headed by an assistant to the president and performs 3 significant functions. Policy coordination. The primary role of the policy councils is to coordinate the development of administration policy. This frequently includes developing significant legislative priorities, coordinating policy decisions that impact multiple departments and agencies, and at times coordinating policy decisions within a single department or agency. This process must ensure that all relevant offices are included, that competing or conflicting opinions are thoroughly discussed and evaluated, and when there is a disagreement among White House senior staff or among cabinet members, a well-structured question is presented to the president for an intermediate or final decision. Policy advice. By virtue of working in the White House, the heads of the 3 policy councils will also function as independent policy advisors to the president. This aspect of the role will vary depending on the individual in this position and the president's governing philosophy. Incumbents have ranged from honest brokers who mostly coordinate and ensure that all opinions are fairly presented to the president, to policy deciders who largely drive a given policy topic on behalf of the president. Policy implementation. The policy councils also manage and mediate the implementation of previous policy decisions. Implementation of a new statute or an executive order frequently takes years and involves many distinct and more granular policy decisions along the way. It is essential to have a centralized process for evaluating and coordinating these decisions, especially if they involve more than one cabinet department or agency with differing opinions on the best approach for securing the president's goals. The above functions have recently been managed by policy councils through a tiered interagency policy process. This process helps to identify differences of opinion and reach a decision without having to take every issue to the president. It can be used to address a single question or monitor a recurring issue on an ongoing basis. Typically, the process involves multiple cabinet departments and agencies that have a pertinent role, policy interest, or disagreement. Each policy council's process could involve the following committees: